There's nothing left to explain. You have known it for some time now, not as idea, but as a shift in the way rooms feel when you enter them, not as relief, but as a rearrangement. Something in you stopped arguing with a verdict that had never been accurate. You recognize this the moment when the entire structure of self-accusation collapses, not because you fought it, not because someone finally validated you, but because the psyche simply exhausted its capacity to sustain a lie. It is already done, the window is still there, the light through it is the same light, but you are standing somewhere different inside the room, and the room knows it. For years, and I want you to sit with the weight of that word, asterisk years, times you organized your inner life around a wrong premise. You moved through relationships, through obligations, through silences and confrontations and apologies, carrying the quiet assumption that the disorder was in you, that you were too much or not enough, or constituted in some way that made harm inevitable wherever you appeared. You learn to present yourself in ways that minimize disruption. You monitored your own reactions before anyone else could. You pre-corrected. You withdrew before being pushed. You filled the room with accommodation and called it love. But accommodation is not love. I have written this elsewhere, not as theory, but as fact. What the psyche cannot integrate, it will eventually project, and what has been projected onto you long enough, shame, instability, excess, need, you began to carry as though it belonged to you. This is how the wound is transmitted, not through violence alone, through the sustained, daily certainty of others that you were the source of their discomfort. You were not the source, you were the mirror into which something uncomfortable was being placed, and then told times, this is yours, hold it, explain it, apologize for it. Now the window stands between you and that old arrangement, and you cannot step back through it. There is a particular quality to this kind of internal rearrangement, and I want to name it precisely because most descriptions of it flatten what is actually happening. It does not feel like victory. It does not feel like healing in the way that word is commonly used, with its warm, gradual connotations of recovery and softness. It feels, at first, almost disorienting, as if the furniture of the inner house has shifted 1 inch in every direction, nothing missing, nothing broken, but nothing quite where the hand expects it. I have watched this happen in my work again and again. A patient comes in convinced of their own disorder. They have been told, directly or through years of accumulated implication, that they are the wound in every room they enter, and then, quietly, not through catharsis, but through a slow erosion of the false, the premise gives way, and the first sensation is not relief, it is something closer to vertigo. The old structure is gone, the new one has not yet acquired the density of lived-in certainty. This is where you are, not triumphant, not restored, simply rearranged. The window in this story matters. I chose that word carefully, because a window is not a door. A door is a decision. A window is a recognition. You did not choose to see what you now see. It presented itself to you after a long accumulation of moments in which something in you refused quietly. without announcement, to keep accepting a definition that did not correspond to what you had actually lived. Think of what you have actually lived, not as a list of grievances. I am not inviting you into resentment, but think of the specific texture of it, the way you rehearsed conversations before they happened, so that the other person would not have to manage their discomfort with your reality. The way you timed your needs to appear only when the environment was stable enough to absorb them without consequence. The way you learned to make your pain small, portable, invisible, a kind of psychological origami that let you fold yourself into whatever shape the room required. This is not sensitivity gone wrong. This is a highly organized adaptation to an environment that could not tolerate being witnessed. And here's what I want you to understand, not as comfort, but as structural fact. Adaptation of this precision does not arise in people who are the problem. It arises in people who were trained systematically to manage the anxiety of others as though it were their own responsibility. The over-functioning self, the one who read the room before anyone else had finished entering it, the one whose hypervigilance was so refined it looked from outside like empathy, and was empathy but was also survival, intelligence operating beneath the surface. You were not the wound, you were the one who kept the wound from being felt by those who had not yet agreed to carry it. There is a dream I want to describe to you, not my dream, but something that emerges again and again when I work with people at this precise threshold. A house, always a house, and in the house, one room that has been shut, not locked dramatically, simply closed, and the person dreaming is moving through all the other rooms, the familiar ones, the ones that feel lived in, slightly worn, acceptable, and they are not opening the closed door. They are working around it, organizing the other rooms more elaborately to compensate for the fact that one room remains inaccessible. And then, at some point in the dream, without decision, without effort, they are simply standing in front of the closed door, and the door is already open. It was open. The room is empty. There is nothing inside that should have required so many years of careful avoidance. This is your dream, if you have not already had it. The room was not dangerous. The room was simply the place where the truth was being stored carefully, out of sight, because the truth could not be permitted in the rest of the house without disrupting the arrangement everyone had agreed to. The truth is this: the problem was never yours to solve because the problem was never yours. I am not telling you this to incite anger. Anger will come in its own time, and when it does, do not misread it. Do not rush to transform it into forgiveness or convert it into a spiritual practice or use it as evidence of your own immaturity. The anger is structural. It belongs to the psyche's own recognition that something was taken from it, taken quietly, taken with the full participation of your cooperation. Because cooperation was the only way to remain safe. The window stands open, and what you now see through it is not the world as you imagined it would look when you finally understood. It is not simpler, it is not warmer, it is only accurate, and accuracy, after a long time of living in distortion, has its own severe, specific relief, not the relief of comfort. but the relief of no longer defending a position you never believed. The rearrangement is complete. What has not yet caught up is the rest of you, the habits, the reflexes, the pre-corrected gestures that still fire automatically before the mind has a chance to intervene. We will turn to those now. There is a particular cruelty in reflexes, not cruelty in the dramatic sense, not the cruelty of intention or malice. The cruelty of the reflex is quieter than that, and far more intimate. It is the cruelty of a body that learned something true and owns, and has not yet received word that the conditions have changed. You know what I am describing. You have already seen it. The recognition has happened. The premise has collapsed. The window is open, and yet the hand still moves toward the old gesture. The voice still softens at a particular moment. The explanation still begins to form before anyone has asked for it. The apology assembles itself in the throat before the offense has even been identified. This is not failure. This is the lag, and the lag is one of the least discussed features of genuine psychological change because we have been taught to imagine inner transformation as complete and immediate, as if the recognition, once arrived, restructures everything downstream. As if the psyche were a software system that, once updated, runs the new version everywhere simultaneously. It does not work this way. The psyche is not a system, it is a sediment, layers of experience, laid down across years, each with its own logic, its own survival function, its own internal coherence. When the topmost layer shifts, when the premise changes, the deeper layers do not immediately receive the revision. They continue operating according to the instructions they were given at the time of their formation. And those instructions were very specific. They said times make yourself readable, asterisk. They said times do not create discomfort by being opaque or complex or unpredictable or unmanageable, asterisk. They said times stay within the range of what can be tolerated, because exceeding that range has consequences, asterisk. And the consequences were not abstract, they were felt in the body, in the withdrawal of warmth, in the escalation of tension, in the particular silence that falls when a room decides it does not want what you just offered. You learned, of course you learned. Learning was the only available response to an environment that could not expand to include you as you actually were. So you contracted, not once, not consciously, but over years, in increments so small they were invisible as they were happening. A slight modulation of the voice here, a topic quietly retired there, a feeling held back, translated, presented in a format the room could receive without flinching. I have called this, in my work, the persona as survival structure, not persona in the colloquial sense, not a performance, not a false face deliberately worn. Persona in the deeper sense, the mediating layer between the inner life and the outer world, which every person develops, which serves a genuine function, but which, under sufficient pressure, grows rigid, grows thick, begins to operate not as a membrane permeable, responsive, but as a wall, and behind the wall, something waits. It waits not with patience, Exactly. Patience implies acceptance of delay. What waits behind the overthickened persona is something more like pressure, a slow, accumulating insistence that has nowhere to go, that cannot be discharged because the channels through which it might move have been progressively narrowed by all the accommodations, all the translations, all the careful management of what you permitted yourself to show. This is what you were managing, not others' discomfort, only though that too. You were managing the pressure of your own unlived reality, pressing against a persona that had been constructed to keep it in. The reflex, then, is not weakness. The reflex is the persona still operating, still performing its original function, still trying to protect you from consequences that, in the current moment, are no longer the consequences they once were. But the persona does not know this yet. It knows only what it was trained to know, that certain expressions of self provoke certain responses from the environment, and it acts accordingly, automatically. Below the level of deliberate choice, the way a hand draws back from heat before the mind has registered the word times fire. What changes now is not the reflex itself, at least not immediately. What changes is your relationship to it. You watch it fire, you notice it assembling, and instead of following it unquestioningly, as though it were simply the natural shape of the moment, you see it for what it is, a learned response to a past danger, firing in a present situation that no longer contains that danger in the same form.